CIT 1121, Module 13, Submodule 1. This is actually the second half of this particular module because we did 13.2 first. So this, the label of the name of this particular video will be 13.2, even though it's really 13.1. We did 13.2 in the 13.1 video. We're going to do 13.1 in the 13.2 video. Enough explanation. Let's go ahead and move forward. There's only a few slides in here, and it is the message types of ICMP. So we're getting into here is there's going to be some fields, and those fields are going to be recognized and read by receiving devices, and they're going to identify if something is successful or if something is unsuccessful. It will have a code value that comes along with it, and there are different code values, and you need to be aware of those different code values. This slide here just identifies the fact that there are 4 different code types for unreachable messages in IPv4, but there are 5 in IPv6. So not a huge deal, but something you should be aware of. This slide talks about the idea that when you have a failure, you may get a response like expired in transit. That just means this. It just means you sent a ping out, and by the time that you were expecting to get a response, it hasn't come back yet. So it'll say expired in transit, and that's just a time exceeded type message that is used to let you know that this was a failed attempt. It is an unreliable best effort protocol. It is connectionless, so it doesn't really get any response back that says, hey, by the way, this is why it failed. We just know that it did not come back. Okay. IPv6 messages. This is something that's interesting. Router solicitation and router advertisement messages, neighbor solicitation, neighbor advertisements. We talked about those in the IPv6 chapter, and they're actually part of ICMP. And here's what's really weird. They were available in IPv4, but we decided the best possible method used or best practice for finding devices on a LAN was ARP. ARP was chosen as the IPv4 method that devices would use, and the neighbor and router solicitation messages from ICMP were turned off. There's also an ICMP redirect message type that could redirect you to a secondary default gateway, which is still turned off in both IPv4 and IPv6 because they feel that maybe it's a little bit too dangerous to have a gateway respond back and say, hey, by the way, I'm not going to forward your traffic, but if you could just redirect your traffic to this other gateway right now, that would be super awesome. So that's another one that's been out there. So just keep that in mind. So really, when you look at how IPv6 works, if you've been around and you've seen ICMP toolboxes before, you know that router solicitations and neighbor solicitation messages have been there, and they have just been turned down. And ARP was the predominant method of neighbor notification or discovery in IPv4. So no big deal there. This just shows that there's a push-pull mechanism with the router advertisements. The routers are going to advertise their information out onto a local area network every 200 seconds. But if you have a PC and it sends out a router solicitation, the router will answer it as it receives it. So that's all they're getting into here. So I like to say push-pull on that. So it just means that the router advertisements are going to be around all the time. Either they're going to push out notifications every 200 seconds, or we're going to pull, which means the client says, hey, I'm looking for a router, hello, and the router solicitation will go out and a router advertisement will respond to that solicitation. That's all they're talking about in this slide. One of the other things that's a non-required method is something called DAD. And DAD is duplicate address detection. It serves the same purpose as gratuitous ARP. It's much tougher to have a duplicate address with 128 bits than it is to have a duplicate address with 32 bits. but it is possible that you could have a duplicate address. So when a device turns up, it might run a DAD request, which just says this: I'm going to run a neighbor solicitation on myself and check to see if anybody responds back and says that they have the exact same IP address that I have. And it's a necessary thing. So it is not required, but it is something that does take the place of gratuitous ARP, which you've talked about in the past. And this is just the second half of that piece. So that gets us through module 13.